With Fanaa, it was always, that was the first, the first one that got produced. So, her being blind was very instrumental in what happens later in the story. But with Khan, what it was that it came very much from the requirements of the plot. Because if our crux was a man who would, for the sake of love, take on this impossible quixotic mission to try and meet the President of the United States, the question is that in this type of cynical time that we live in, who's going to take on something so foolhardy, and so silly, and so impossible in a way, and the two things actually have no connection with each other, right? Except in a sort of in a more subtle way, right? So working backwards from that, I was like, I need a character who would be that innocent or that literal to be able to and want to take on something like this for the sake of the woman that he loves. So working backwards, it came into him having Asperger's, and the traits that it has as a that allows him to be that kind of person. So it was the two things were not connected, but yes, out of 2 out of 4, are I don't know, minority characters, I suppose, in that sense. The drafts are endless. So, but I think what qualifies as a complete rewrite is probably less. But otherwise, I have like 40 different versions of the script on the computer, sometimes more. Going back to the first part of your question, it really depends. The first script I ever wrote was something I just wrote for myself, like I told you. But the others have sort of been commissioned. So there has been input, or direction. It's a story, just on the story level, the director or the producer has liked it. So it's not something that I would just sort of start off and just write off on my own, I've actually pitched the story idea and it's been commissioned, so then it's been written. But if I have to write something on my own, which I'm doing now for an English language film that I want to do, I just, my test is that every time I repeat that story to anybody, and not to producers or whatever, just to anyone, if it still gives me that kick and that excitement, then I know that I want to write it. Otherwise you repeat a story 2-3 times and it starts seeming boring to you, then you know that, okay, maybe this was just a flash in the pan. That's my way of judging. Other people, have different ways. In my case, and this is an anomaly, but it's usually the latter, because when I'm writing, I don't know how people weave songs in, really. It's very hard, because telling the story, and sometimes it comes naturally. You feel ki acha, if there is a wooing situation or whatever it is, that this is a good place for a song, because a song can, give you a space of time, even with around a single situation, right? But more often than not, the songs are then woven in later. Another reason for that is that songs also have a certain rhythm. So you can't have, for instance, you don't have 2 songs within 5 minutes of each other, because the audience is like, "Arey phir gana," So you also have to find the right spot for it in that, in that way. So it's tough, but you do it. You do it in conjunction with the director. You work it out. What was interesting in My Name is Khan is that even though Karan is really known for his songs and dances and all of that, he had decided to go with a film which doesn't have lip sync songs. And also it was the kind of story that sort of lent itself to that. The poor man has Asperger's. Imagine he suddenly starts singing, in the middle of everything. It would have just been completely ridiculous. So in that it was interesting, because in each of the songs the screenplay had to move forward. And what was happening had to move forward. So that was interesting, because then that a song is going on, so you can't really use words, a lot of words. You have a smattering, like a sentence here and there. So you're writing mini silent scenes that actually are put to song. So that was interesting. It was a very interesting thing to do. I've actually just finished a tour of a few universities in the US. And I'll tell you what I've been telling the students there as well, is that, the idea of doing this film was really not about talking about terrorism, which is what a lot of post-9/11 films do, right? Whether it's made in the West, whether it's made, in another country, whether it's made here, they're really talking a lot about the terrorism angle and people being persecuted, therefore turning to violence, right? But the fact of the matter is that there in 1 billion Muslims in the world, if I'm being very generous, you would say, and this is an exaggerated generosity, it's certainly not that number, you would say 10 million maybe are involved in subversive activities. You have 990 million people whose story is never told. Because they are moderates, they're living fruitful lives, they're not out trying to destroy the world or Americans or anybody or whatever it is. And their story never gets told. So the idea behind doing this film is to give them a voice. Because he's an ordinary man in a very extraordinary sort of situation, you know, and how does he deal with it as an individual, as a regular citizen of the world? So that was the idea behind it. So you know, so there isn't. So the idea was not to concentrate on that everybody else concentrates on. You know, Khuda Ke Liye had some aspect of that, but even there it was very, you know, because there were multiple stories going on. You know, it was a different space, and being Pakistani, it had a different slant to it than we would have as representing a Muslim from India.